Hi, I'm Taya. 2 weeks ago, I walked into what I thought was just a quarterly meeting. Instead, my father handed the company I built, every late night, every pitch deck, every dollar of it, to my sister. He looked me in the eye and said, "She'll be CEO from now on. You just need to work harder." No warning, no explanation, just a smile and a shrug, like I was the help. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I made one phone call. And when my father saw the documents in Jude's hands, his face drained of color, like he finally realized who had really built the empire and who legally owned it. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. What time are you watching this and where from? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. The morning smelled like cedar and concrete. The scent still clung to the glass and steel I once fought tooth and nail to erect. I stepped through the front doors of Maddox HQ, my headquarters, with my heels clicking softly against the polished floors, like punctuation marks in a sentence no one cared to read anymore. I adjusted the lapel of my navy blazer and glanced up at the wall behind reception. My name was still etched there. Taya Maddox, founder. For a moment, that meant something. The front desk clerk gave me a nervous smile, then quickly looked down at her screen. Something was off. I headed toward the main conference room, expecting the quarterly investor strategy session I'd spent weeks preparing for. But before I could reach the door, a young assistant I didn't recognize rushed up to me, breathless. "Oh, Ms. Maddox." "Here," she said, shoving a glossy program into my hand. "We weren't sure if you were coming early." I blinked. Coming early for what? She was already gone. I looked down. CEO Transition Ceremony, honoring legacy, embracing the future. The font was bold, dramatic. I skimmed the list of speakers: Leora Maddox, Victor Maddox, Eleanor Maddox. My name was buried in small print: Taya Maddox, founder. No speech slot, no continuing leadership mention, just a relic, a footnote. My heart thudded. The polished floors felt suddenly unstable beneath my feet. I pushed open the boardroom doors. They were all there already: investors, executives, my parents, and Leora. She stood near the podium in a tailored ivory pantsuit, glowing like she'd just won Miss Texas and a Nobel in the same week. I scanned the seats. My usual spot, 3 chairs from center, had a fresh placard. It now read, "Chief Strategy Officer, Leora Maddox." My name wasn't anywhere. An usher waved me to the far end of the row. No nameplate, just a chair. I sat, slowly. The room dimmed and a warm spotlight hit the stage. My father stepped forward, all smiles and posture, gripping the mic like a pastor at a revival. "Today," he began, "we celebrate the foundation this company was built upon, and we honor the quiet builder behind it, my eldest daughter, Taya." Applause, polite, detached. She's the hammer, the stone, the reason we have walls and vision. I blinked. My throat tightened. Something inside me warned, he's not done. "And now," he continued, turning toward Leora, "we enter a new chapter, one of innovation, visibility, and brilliance. Please welcome our new CEO, Leora Maddox." Applause thundered, louder than I'd ever heard for me. I couldn't move. Leora stepped onto the stage with a radiant smile and began her speech, one I realized I'd heard before, only I had written it. Not for her, but for a company culture video 2 years ago. She had lifted it line for line. Legacy isn't just what we leave behind, it's the breath we pour into what still grows. I had whispered those words to my team when we were building through a pandemic, when morale was low and I was holding the line. She wasn't even there then. She was in Italy, finding her voice. Now she was using mine. A colleague, Alan from marketing, glanced my way. I met his eyes for a split second and gave a small nod, a forced smile. I wasn't going to cry. Not in a room full of people clapping for my replacement. My mother never looked at me, not once. She smiled at Leora, adjusted her pearls, and beamed like she'd known all along. Of course she had. It hit me like a silent gut punch. They planned this without me, months ago. I sat, hands clenched under the table, not shaking, just still, like stone. My fingers touched something in my blazer pocket. The old fountain pen. The one from high school. TM, keep building, engraved along its barrel. A gift from my mother when I got into architecture school. Funny. I rolled it between my thumb and forefinger, feeling the weight, remembering the day she said, "You don't need noise to be powerful." I gripped it tighter. "You want quiet? I'll give you quiet." Not the quiet of defeat, the quiet of calculation, the kind that echoes. I didn't storm out. I walked past the applause, past the glass doors, and straight toward the elevator. I pressed the button to the top floor, my floor, or so I thought, and kept my face steady, my spine straight. But inside, something was unraveling, quietly, but fast. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into a hallway that used to greet me with pride. Now it just stared back, sterile, unbothered, as if I had never belonged. I made a beeline for my office, heels tapping over the marble like I still owned the place. The first blow landed at my desk. I sat down, powered on my computer, and typed in my credentials. Password, two-step code, the usual. Access denied. I blinked, tried again, denied, a third time, locked out. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I pushed back from the desk just as my assistant, a bright-eyed girl named Fiona, peeked in through the door. Her steps hesitated when she saw me. She held a tablet in one hand, the other gripping her phone like a life raft. "Hey, Taya," she said, voice brittle. "It said your account is undergoing a transition." "A transition?" I repeated. She swallowed. "They said, per new leadership protocol." My stomach twisted. "I need access to my project files, Fiona, the pitch decks, the R&D updates." She hesitated. "I'll have to check with Leora." The name dropped like a rock in my chest. Fiona looked down, embarrassed, then added in a whisper, "They already changed your title in the directory." I didn't reply. I just stood up and walked past her. The hallways looked the same but felt wrong, like a childhood home gutted and flipped for resale. I passed the wall where my portrait once hung, an image of me, arms crossed, smiling in front of the first prototype lab. Now, a brushed metal frame held a pastel poster. "Success is a team sport." They didn't even have the decency to patch the holes from the previous screws. I continued walking, past the shared workspace I built when collaboration was just a buzzword, past the glass-enclosed innovation hub I had personally pitched to investors, past my legacy, until I reached the far end, the new executive wing. I'd overseen its construction, paid for it myself after the board hesitated on funding. I remembered signing the last check, 7 figures, and telling myself, this is where we grow next. Now, a gold plaque gleamed beside the double doors. The Leora Maddox Leadership Center. No mention of me, not even a line. I stared at it for a long time, the name catching the light, shiny and smug. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I turned around and walked out, not hurried, not ashamed, but not ready to scream either. I made it to the parking garage and sat in my car. Just sat. The silence was so thick I could hear the ticking of the cooling engine. I reached for my phone, opened the contact list, scrolled past my mother, past Leora, past family group chat. I stopped at Jude R. Council, a name I hadn't dialed since the last time we faced a hostile acquisition, a man who knew every contract I'd ever signed, every clause I'd fought for. I didn't call, not yet. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out my journal, and flipped to a fresh page. My handwriting looked calmer than I felt as I wrote, "They took everything with smiles, but I kept one thing, the truth." I paused, then underlined it, twice. Something shifted in my chest, not anger, at least not the kind that erupts. It was something denser, older, like coal waiting to be lit. I closed the journal and set it on my lap. My hand brushed the inside pocket of my purse and landed on the pen. The old one. Engraved, TM, keep building. I held it between my fingers, tracing the initials with my thumb. The weight of it. It carried more than ink. It carried years. I remembered graduation night, standing outside our front porch in my cap and gown, my mother adjusting the tassel, handing me the pen wrapped in parchment. "You don't let them define your legacy," she'd whispered. "You define it, quietly, if you must, but completely." That same mother had stood this morning and clapped for Leora. I looked out across the parking lot, the sun casting long shadows across the lines. I wasn't crying, but something behind my eyes burned, like dry paper before it catches flame. I took a deep breath, clicked the pen open, and started writing again. I got home just before 11. The city was quiet in that strange, suspended way it always is after something life-altering. I'd parked in the same garage, climbed the same 4 floors, turned the same key, but everything felt off, like walking into a hotel room you once called home but now barely recognized. The apartment was clean, dimly lit by the kitchen sconces I never got around to replacing. I slipped off my shoes by the door and stood there for a moment, coat still on, bag still hanging from my shoulder. I didn't want to move, didn't want to sit, as if the air itself was waiting for me to figure something out before I was allowed to rest. Eventually, I made my way to the small desk in the corner of the living room. I didn't bother turning on the lamp. I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out an old leather folder, worn at the edges, creased from years of being shoved into briefcases and forgotten under conference notes. I had tossed it in the glove box 2 years ago, meaning to file it properly, but never did. Funny how life lets you procrastinate on everything except betrayal. I flipped through pages of stock agreements, trademark certificates, LLC filings. The smell of aged paper and printer toner clung to everything. Then I saw it. Founder Role Revision, Maddox & Co., typed neatly across the top of a single page, my name just below it, Taya Maddox. And then, there it was, my signature at the bottom. A slow, pulsing heat crept up my neck. I picked up the page, brought it closer to the light from the kitchen. No one ever calls it what it is. They call it streamlining, or succession clarity, or foundational structure. But this was a handover. This was the moment I unknowingly signed my own erasure, and I remembered exactly when I did it. I was 26. Riding the high of our second investment round, burnt out but proud, my eyes still full of what we were building. We were in Dad's study. He handed me the form with a smile and a glass of Pinot. "It's just legal housekeeping, sweetheart," he said, tapping the paper with his pen. "You'll always be my partner. This is just to make sure your sister's role is clear to the board." Clear. He'd said it like I was already protected. I remembered feeling tired that night. I didn't read the fine print. I wanted to trust him. I needed to believe that being his daughter still meant something beyond biology. Now, that trust felt like something sticky on my skin I couldn't scrub off. I set the page down and stood up, needing air. I moved toward the window. The skyline blinked back at me, indifferent, and then, like someone whispering behind my ear, a memory flickered. A party. Last year, we were hosting a fundraising gala at the rooftop of a boutique hotel downtown. I was in the hallway near the restrooms, fixing the clasp on my bracelet. I heard them, Leora and her friend, giggling behind the bathroom door. "She builds, I brand," Leora laughed. "She won't even notice what I'm taking." There was a pause, then more laughter, wine laughter, champagne confidence. I remember chuckling at the time, brushing it off. I told myself it was sibling banter, just noise, not worth feeding. Now it played back like a confession dressed in lipstick. I returned to the desk and sat. The legal form sat there like a crime scene. I picked up my pen, the one Mom gave me at graduation, and started jotting notes on a notepad. Words formed without me thinking. She builds, I brand. You'll always be my partner. Just legal housekeeping. They all meant one thing. They didn't think I'd ever fight back. They thought I'd keep building while they renamed every brick I laid. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, heart steady but slow. Then, almost without thinking, I grabbed my phone and opened the Messages app. Scrolled down. Jude R. on council. I tapped the number. It rang once, then again. He picked up with the same voice I remembered from years ago, calm and direct. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, and I exhaled, the sound caught somewhere between relief and fire. Morning light filtered through my blinds in thin, slanted stripes, like prison bars painted gold. I hadn't slept. I didn't need sleep. I needed answers. I showered without really noticing the water, threw on a dark blazer over a blouse I'd once worn to pitch to our first round of angel investors, slid my keycard into my bag like muscle memory. The company might have removed my name from the website, but the walls still knew who built them. Midtown traffic was kind to me that morning. It was barely past 8 when I pulled into the garage beneath Maddox & Comber headquarters. The same security guard nodded at me out of habit, then hesitated, his eyes darting down to his walkie. I nodded back without breaking stride. The lobby smelled like polished stone and lavender diffuser oil, new, intentional, cold. I walked toward the elevator and reached for my badge. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. Behind me, a soft voice. "Ms. Maddox?" I turned. A receptionist I barely knew, maybe 2 months into the job, stood at the desk, eyes wide and fingers twisting a pen. I was told not to let you up." There was a silence between us. I didn't fill it. She looked away first. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I pressed my lips together and nodded once. Not at her, at the absurdity. No directory listing, no working badge, and apparently no clearance in the very building I'd helped finance from blueprint to brick. I stepped aside and waited in the corner of the lobby like a guest in my own life. That's when I saw her. Leora glided in through the revolving doors like a socialite arriving at a photo shoot, flowing beige slacks, white blouse, green juice in one hand, phone in the other. Her heels barely made a sound on the tile. She spotted me and offered a smile that looked laminated. "Well," she said brightly, "you're early." "I work here," I said. "About that," she replied, sipping from the bottle. "We're just going through a little reorganization. You know, culture shift, streamlining." I stared at her. "You mean a takeover?" She tilted her head. "I prefer evolution." There was a beat of silence. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough for the receptionist not to hear. "You're welcome to shadow me this quarter. Observe. Transition gracefully. Consider it immersion." I didn't blink. I founded this company. "And now," she said smoothly, "you get to learn how to keep up." The air between us cracked like dry ice. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out, back through those revolving doors, past the same security guard whose eyes darted down again, this time not bothering to meet mine. I reached my car, hands steady now, rage cooling into something sharper than grief. I opened my phone, 48 new emails, subject line after subject line, excited for the new Maddox & Comber vision. Rebranding rollout. Congratulations to CEO Leora Maddox. Phenomenal design direction. So fresh. I tapped one open. The branding images? Mine. I'd sketched those out in my dining room 6 months ago. The slogan? A line I'd crafted for a Forbes feature that never got published. The investor contact sheet attached to the internal memo? I had built it name by name, coffee by coffee, and nowhere, not in the press kit, not in the credits, not in the footer, was my name. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't scream. I simply forwarded the email to Jude with one line in the subject, "How much do I own on paper again?" He responded within 60 seconds, enough to make them very, very nervous. I leaned back against the seat, closed my eyes, and let the hum of traffic buzz around me. I wasn't furious anymore. I was focused, because if they wanted war dressed as wellness, they were about to see what a woman looks like when she builds with fire instead of blueprints. 3 days later, I stood outside the marble lobby of Lockridge & Rowe, the downtown firm where Maddox & Co.'s earliest contracts were notarized, where our first Series A investment was signed, and where my name used to mean something. I had chosen this boardroom for a reason, not because it was neutral, but because it wasn't. A junior associate opened the door for me with a nervous glance, and I stepped inside. The carpet was a muted navy, tight weave, barely any give underfoot. Everything about the space said, "Say what you came to say, then leave." I wore black, not funereal, not flashy, just precise. A soft wool suit I'd bought years ago for a deposition that never happened. My hair pulled back, my heels low but firm. Jude stood as I entered, nodded once, then gestured to the head of the long walnut table. His way of saying, "This is your room. Take it." Across from me sat 7 men and women, most of them silver-haired and silent. Some I hadn't seen in years, some I'd pitched to, convinced, grown beside. A few looked at me now with something that hovered between apology and awe. One of them, Mr. Redmond, who once told me I presented like someone who builds empires, not decks, leaned in and murmured, "You didn't deserve what they did." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Jude placed the thick folder in front of me with the reverence of a priest setting down scripture. "Shall we begin?" I said, voice level. No one objected. I opened the folder and flipped to the tab labeled Governance. There it was. The founding documents, amendments, voting structure breakdown, and right beneath the dotted line on the founder role revision agreement was a blank. No signature, no initials, no consent. I lifted the page and turned it toward them. "This," I said, "was the document my father announced to the public as finalized. As you can see, it never was." A whisper rolled across the room like a shifting wind. Paper rustled, glasses were adjusted. One board member squinted at the document and asked softly, "So the 62%? "Still mine," I said. Silence deepened. Not the kind that demanded explanation, but the kind that acknowledged a realignment. A power shift. I didn't stop there. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single-page printout. No fluff, no sugarcoating, just a list. I passed it around. "These are the internal placements that will be reviewed over the next 30 days, I said. Departments, roles, expenditures, project scopes. The names were not random. Each one had been ushered in by Leora. Each one had aligned their signatures to the erasure of mine. "This isn't revenge," I added. "It's risk management." No one spoke. Jude leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Maddox is exercising her rights as majority stakeholder. The board's fiduciary obligation is to uphold the integrity of the company, not protect familial bias." Redmond cleared his throat. "What about the PR hit?" "I'll handle that," I said. "Truth always makes better press than denial." I let the silence stretch until the weight of it pressed into the grain of the table. Then I stood. Before gathering my things, I looked each of them in the eye, not with fury, but with the calm that comes after the flood. I let my name be erased once. That won't happen again. The room stayed still as I walked out, the echo of my heels slicing through their disbelief. I didn't look back, but I knew this wasn't over. The rain had been coming down steadily since late afternoon, soaking the sidewalks and turning the city into a blur of glistening gray. By the time I got home, it was past 9. My shoes left faint, muddy impressions on the tile floor of my foyer. I dropped my coat on the hook, poured a glass of water, and walked toward my home office, the one place that still felt like mine, until I saw it. There, on the floor in front of my door, was a red-sealed envelope. No postage, no return address, just my name in thick, angular strokes, like someone had carved it with intent. I bent down, picked it up, and stared at the wax seal. It was the same crest my father used on our company's founding letterhead. I didn't sit. I didn't move. I opened it right there, standing barefoot in my hallway. A single sheet. Cease and desist. From Maddox and Cohen, signed by his attorney. Effective immediately, you are to cease all hostile business activity targeting Maddox and Co. and its executives, or face civil injunction. I reread the line 3 times, but the words didn't shift. They stayed as sharp and absurd as the moment I opened them. My own father had declared legal war. Not even a phone call, just a sealed warning left at my door like I was a stranger. Or worse, an enemy. I walked to my desk, the paper still in hand, and woke my laptop. That's when things shifted. It took longer than usual to start up. The fan roared, screen blinked twice, then settled into a normal desktop, almost too normal. A strange icon pulsed faintly at the bottom corner. A folder I hadn't opened in weeks suddenly showed last accessed 9:32 p.m. I hadn't touched it. Before I could process, my phone rang. Jude. His voice was tight. "Taya, you need to change your passwords, now." What happened? "They're leaking your journal, selective entries, screenshots, first on gossip blogs, then some startup news sites. The headlines are not good." I clicked open Safari. My stomach twisted. Founder's mental breakdown in private pages. Delusional diary of a fallen CEO. She built a brand, then lost herself in it. Beneath the headlines were entries ripped out of context. A line I'd written during a low point after Mom's chemo. Another after my breakup with Elias. My pain, my doubt, all painted as instability, and yet nothing was fabricated, just twisted. I shut the laptop slowly, my hand trembling. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything but the storm outside, the sound of water hitting windows like tiny fists. I walked into the kitchen and stood in front of the tall mirror leaning against the wall. My reflection stared back, tired, damp, barefaced, but not broken. In my other hand, I still held the cease and desist. "So they want war," I said softly. I turned, walked to the printer in the corner of the room, and opened a blank document. I typed one sentence. Just one. The day they erased me, I started taking notes. I printed it. Plain black ink. I took the page, slid it into a clear folder, and laid it on top of the red envelope. That was my answer. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't spin. I'd let the truth speak, and I'd make sure they'd hear it. Every word. And now, they'd learn just how thorough those notes were. The morning after the storm, I walked into Jude's office. No makeup, no apology. Just a folder, a phone, and the kind of silence that carried more weight than 1,000 words. He didn't ask how I'd slept. We both knew the answer. He slid the manila folder toward me. "They're in," he said. "Every share, every document, every shell layer verified. The holding structure is officially under your name." I stared at the signatures. My hands didn't shake. They shouldn't. After all, this wasn't revenge. This was history being corrected. "It was never about taking it from them," I said, almost to myself. "It's about showing them they never had it to begin with." Jude smiled faintly. "Then let's show them." The sun dipped low behind the skyline as I stepped out of the car in front of the peninsula. Friday evening, charity gala, cameras already blinking to life outside the revolving doors. I knew the floor plan by heart. The ballroom had been the site of our first investor dinner, back when Maddox & Cober was still just an idea scribbled on cocktail napkins. Now it looked like a coronation. Inside, everything glittered in silver and white. My father was already seated near the front, a custom lapel pin catching the light. Celine, in a champagne silk gown, was laughing at something one of the hosts said, her fingers toying with a crystal flute. She didn't see me, or maybe she didn't recognize me in the black velvet dress I wore, not flashy but sharp, deliberate. People stared, but not the way they used to, not with sympathy, with uncertainty, as if trying to remember which side of the war I was on. I took my seat in the fourth row, not up front, not at the back, just there, present. A few moments later, the host took the stage. After the usual charity highlights and applause breaks, he cleared his throat. "And now it is my great pleasure to welcome our final honoree, founder, innovator, and a name synonymous with legacy. Please join me in celebrating Taya Maddox, this year's Pioneer of the Year." I didn't move at first, just stood slowly, the hush spreading faster than applause. I made my way to the stage without looking at my family. My heels echoed louder than I expected. At the podium, the host extended the plaque toward me. I shook my head. "I didn't come to accept anything," I said, voice steady. I came to correct the record. A flicker of confusion across the host's face. He stepped back. I reached into the slim leather folder tucked beneath my arm and pulled out a single page. Signed, stamped, notarized. This, I said, holding it to the mic, is the ownership structure of Maddox Holdings. As of 3 days ago, finalized and recognized under federal and state law. I turned my gaze slowly toward the front row. My sister was never CEO, not legally, not financially, not in any universe where truth matters. Gasps rippled like thunder through the room. Celine stood abruptly, face flushed. "That's a lie!" she snapped. "Dad, tell them." But he didn't stand. He stared at the paper in my hand like it had just started burning. She turned back to me. "You signed the revision years ago. I saw it." I smiled, quietly. "No, Celine, you saw a draft. What you never saw was the final version, the one I never signed." I looked back at the audience. The truth is simple. The structure you praised, the brand you admired, the investors you've invited tonight, they were mine. I didn't build it for credit. I built it because I believed in something bigger than my own name. But since that name has been dragged, erased, and exploited, tonight I reclaim it. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. And just as I turned to leave, I leaned into the mic one last time. And then I said it, the words that made the whole room gasp. I didn't inherit this company, I built it, and for the last 8 years I've been funding it, alone. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was stunned. One of those moments where even the champagne stops bubbling. I stepped back from the podium, handed the microphone to the stunned host, and walked off stage. By the time I reached the hallway, my phone was already buzzing. Texts. Dozens. Then hundreds. A junior staffer, barely out of undergrad, had recorded the entire speech from her seat near the back and uploaded it to TikTok within minutes. Somehow, her angle caught everything. My voice, Celine's face, my father's silence. No filters, no edits, just raw, real-time exposure. The caption? When the family scapegoat flips the script, live. By the time I reached the elevator, the clip had already been viewed over 70,000 times. By the time I got to the executive suite upstairs, a major news network had picked it up for a breaking segment. Corporate blood feud goes public in Chicago, gala mic drop. I didn't smile. I didn't even blink. I just walked into the room where my father and Celine were waiting. The air inside was stale, like velvet curtains and perfume masking something rotten. My father sat by the minibar, swirling a drink he hadn't sipped. Celine was pacing, heels clicking like tiny hammers on marble. "You blindsided us," she hissed before I even shut the door. "You humiliated this family in front of investors, press—" "I corrected a lie," I said calmly. "Several, actually." My father straightened his tie but didn't look up. "We should have known you'd pull something like this. That callous streak. Your mother said it came from your grandmother." "You think this is about temperament?" I asked. "This is about years of decisions made behind my back, money funneled out of my work, credit stripped, legacy reassigned." Celine rolled her eyes. "You're not a martyr, Taya. You're just bitter you weren't the pretty face." I didn't react. Instead, I sat down at the conference table and opened my briefcase. One by one, I laid out 3 folders, one labeled Ownership Proxy Transfers, one labeled Private Capital Contributions, and the last, Resignation and Liability Transfer. "You want to keep spinning this as family restructuring? Fine," I said. "But the numbers are clean, audited, and filed with the board. Every dollar I put in, every contract I upheld, every deal I closed, without your help, is in here. And now it's time to decide how you leave this story." My father finally spoke, his voice low and cold. "This isn't how family handles things." I looked him in the eye. "No, family handles things face to face. Not with hacked emails and cease and desists shoved under my door." He flinched. Celine crossed her arms. "You can't force us out." I didn't blink. "No, but the board can. And if you don't sign these tonight, they will, on Monday morning." The room went still. Celine reached for the pen first. Her hand trembled, but she didn't hesitate. My father stared longer. His eyes scanned the document, but we both knew he wasn't reading. He just signed. I didn't linger. I left the folders where they lay and walked toward the hallway, heels steady, breath slow. As I reached the door, someone from the gala called my name, maybe a reporter, maybe a guest. I didn't turn. There was nothing left to explain. Outside, the air was crisp. The streets of Chicago shimmered under the wet gleam of post-rain pavement. I got into the car, waiting at the curb, and closed the door behind me without a word. My phone buzzed again. The clip had hit 1 million views, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel erased. I felt weightless. At sunrise, I drove to the place where it all started, and ended it my way. The street hadn't changed. Same overgrown hedges, same cracked sidewalk that still lifted at the edge where tree roots pushed the pavement. The same rusted mailbox that had leaned slightly left since 1996. But the woman stepping out of the car today wasn't the girl who once stood here, backpack slipping off one shoulder, hope clenched in a sweaty palm. I walked to the front steps. No keys, no welcome mat. Just the echo of history and the way the morning light hit the chipped paint on the porch rail. My name was never on the deed to this house. Not until last week. A quiet acquisition, sealed through a private LLC. Turns out, my father had mortgaged it to fund one of Celine's expansion deals 5 years ago. When the market turned, he defaulted quietly, hoping no one would notice. I noticed. I didn't tell them I was the buyer. I never will. Inside, the air was still, not stale, just waiting. The hardwood floors creaked exactly where I remembered. The kitchen window still caught the light around 8 a.m., sending gold onto the same spot of tile where I used to sit with cereal and dreams. Room by room, I walked through. The bedroom that was once mine, peach wallpaper long gone, now painted in soft creams and greens, ready for someone new. The framed photo that used to sit on my childhood dresser, the one my mother had once thrown out with a cold, "Don't get sentimental," now hung in the front foyer, fully restored. The tiny bronze frame still bore the scuff mark I gave it when I was 11, but this time, it didn't make me ache. I laid the envelope on the counter. Inside, the final property documents, the foundation paperwork, and a single card addressed to the new residents. This house wasn't for me. It was now a transitional home, funded under the new Taya Maddox Foundation, serving women starting over. One room with a floral quilt and a reading chair bore a brass nameplate. For Eleanor Maddox, may you find the voice you denied others. Irony doesn't heal, but it can speak. Later that afternoon, back in my apartment, I sat by the window with a pen in hand and a letter half written in front of me. Dear Mom and Dad, I'm not writing this for closure. I stopped needing that when you stopped pretending to listen. It wasn't about money, not titles. It was the quiet ways you let me disappear until you needed something to sell. But I've learned something. You don't owe your children love, but I owed myself respect. That was always mine to give. I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer. I won't mail it. It's not for them. The next morning, I met someone for coffee at a tiny cafe 2 blocks from the lake. She was young, sharp, full of the same quiet fire I used to choke down before walking into boardrooms. They told me I should wait my turn, she said. I stirred my tea. Don't. She looked at me, confused. Don't wait. Don't ask for space. Don't hope for permission. Build the damn table. She smiled, not politely, but like she finally recognized herself. As I walked out, I passed a newsstand. The headline was still running, Daughter Turns the Tables on Dynasty. But that wasn't the story. The story was that I didn't burn it all down for revenge. I rebuilt something better, with no need for applause. And if you're listening now, maybe you felt it too. Have you ever been pushed aside by the very people you built everything for? Did you walk away or did you reclaim your voice? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.